after year, more than 1.5 million Cub fans make the faithful pilgrimage by elevated railway, by the L, to Wrigley Field, here on the north side of Chicago. They step off the Addison Street station and the ballpark's it's right there. It's only a block away. Wrigley Field is the oldest ballpark in the National League and the 4th oldest in the majors. But the Northside Ballpark wasn't always called Wrigley Field and didn't always house the Cubs either. In 1914, Chicago restaurant chain owner Charles Wiegman co-founded the ill-fated Federal League, an upstart competitor to the major leagues. That year, he hired architect Zachary Taylor Davis to build a new ballpark for his own Federal League entry, the Chicago Whales. The newly christened Wiegman Field opened on April 23, 1914, and was one of the finest in the country, with a single-deck seating capacity of 14,000. The Chicago Whales played there only 2 years before the Renegade League folded. Wiegman got the National League team, the Cubs, as part of his settlement and moved them into his own ballpark where they still play. The park became known as Cubs Park in 1920 after chewing gum magnate William Wrigley Jr. purchased the team from Wiegman. In 1926, Wrigley added a new upper deck to enlarge the seating capacity and renamed the ballpark Wrigley Field. After the elder Wrigley died in 1932, his son Philip K. Wrigley assumed ownership.
Phil Wrigley was particularly visionary when he took over the ball club in the early 30s from his father. After that, the Cubs began to go real well. If you realize they had pennants in 29, 32, 35, 38, 45. And this was all during Phil Wrigley's time. He was a man who was gung-ho for let's go with radio, and later on, let's go with television.
The 1930s were rollicking times at Wrigley Field despite the Depression. The 32 World Series against the Yankees saw Babe Ruth's famous called shot home run in game number 3. In 1935, Cubs employee Bill Veck planted the fabled ivy on the outfield walls, giving the ballpark the same kind of ambiance as its surrounding Lakeview neighborhood. Some of the apartment buildings here on Sheffield Avenue, right behind center and right field, even have their own rooftop grandstands, kind of like a poor man's skybox, where lucky tenants and owners can catch a game on the privacy of their own home.
To sit in Wrigley Field and look across the street during the game and see the fans on the rooftops, or to go outside the ballpark after a game and see a rock band there playing a kind of impromptu concert. All of this kind of street life adds to the vitality of the city itself, but it also makes the ballpark a kind of more magical place.
I do know this, that this is a wonderful little neighborhood. You got restaurants, you got bars, which I'm interested in, and it's a lovely place when you leave the ballpark to have something to do, somebody to talk to. I love that.
It was a park that was built in a very unique area there. It's close to a community. It's like it's like an apartment building or home in the community, and you have to really be a part of that. Unlike other parks, where the park is usually off the downtown area. I mean, you zip right in to Riverfront Stadium, watch the game, you zip right back on the expressways, and back to Kentucky, Indiana, and all the different cities. But Wrigley Field, when you're in there, it's like visiting the family of all the people that live around there. And as a player, you feel a part of the family of the people in that community.
In 1937, the ballpark was renovated again. New outfield stands were built and a new scoreboard was constructed. With its intimate dimensions and lush green ivy, Wrigley Field soon became known, as it is today, as the Friendly Confines.
Wrigley Field, being a small ballpark, when you went up to the plate, you know, when sitting on the on-deck circle, the fan used to be about 4 or 5 feet from you. And if you're not careful, every time you go to the plate, you try to swing and hit the ball out the ballpark, because everyone wants to see the home run. And you hear a lot of people behind you say, Billy, he's going to be on base, try to hit the ball out the ballpark. So Everything was close here.
It's a close park. You have eye contact with people. They watch you very closely. You cannot hide anything. It's like being under a microscope. You can be playing second base at Wrigley Field, and your kid will walk by, or your wife could come by, or some beautiful girl walk by, and your concentration just kind of drifts away from you. And once you lose it, it's hard to get it back.
I imagined all Major League parks almost like football stadiums, you know what I mean, in the sense that fans were way away from you. And then walking in there and saying, holy cow, you just walk down and they can shake your hand, you know. The other interesting part was when I retired, I went to a ball game and sat in the first row, and I never realized how close home plate was to that box seat. So they must have heard a lot of things I said to the umpire that I didn't realize.
Something else strikes me about Wrigley Field. It's the big green scoreboard towering above the center field bleachers. This scoreboard is a throwback to a simpler time, before the days of instant replays and exploding fireworks. See, up here, the scores of all the games are posted by hand. The Cubs in the 1950s and early 60s became lovable losers to their loyal fans at Wrigley Field. They never rose above 5th place in 2 decades of play. But in 1969, the club was suddenly in a pennant race, leading the New York Mets by 9 games going into September. The Cubs managed to lose the pennant by 8 games to the Mets, but it was in that incredible season that the fabled bleacher bums were born.
They were fun. Phil Wrigley, as a matter of fact, was very taken by them. If you may recall, he even filled up a plane or two and sent them down as his guest to Atlanta for a weekend series one time there. And they were good kids. And of course, you had the right field bleacher bums too. They were the rival organization.
I think it started with about 12 or 13 of them. And they all have their original cards now, although you see maybe 25 or 30 people with bleacher bum cards. But they would sit out there and they would really enjoy the game. Seemed like they would be here 2 hours before the game time.
They come to the park and they would not razz the opposing left fielders. They would always support them and cheer for them too, as well as us. So they were a big part of the Cubs' success in 1969.
The first thing a Cub fan looks for when he comes to the ballpark are the flags above the center field scoreboard. Not only do they line up in order of the National League standings, but they also indicate the wind direction. More than any other factor, stiff breezes blowing off Lake Michigan just blocks away can make or break a game at Wrigley Field. An outbound wind, together with the park's tight power alleys, conspire to make this a home run hitter's paradise.
The wind didn't affect me that much. I know I've seen several players come in and it had some effect on the players. Not only the players who are playing every day, the pitchers. There were several pitchers came in Wrigley Field and saw that flag blowing out like this, and they didn't want to pitch. Something was wrong with them. Got real quick. They got sick.
You know, I keep hearing about other players, well, if they were in Wrigley Field, they'd hit 60 home runs. Well, the wind blows out, but the wind also blows in. There's times that you can't get a cannon out of that ballpark.
Until 1988, one of Wrigley Field's most distinguishing features was its lack of lights. Philip Wrigley always had maintained that baseball was meant to be played in the sunshine. Lights were almost installed, however, in the fall of 1941.
He had the light material purchased, and a lot of it was underneath the stands in left field or out near Waveland Avenue or someplace. Then all of a sudden came a little thing called Pearl Harbor, and that took care of that. And rather than have that critical material be used for something as comparatively unimportant as baseball, he had his man Jim Gallagher on the phone offering this to the Army engineers, the Navy Seabees, or whoever could really use it.
In 1981, the Wrigley family sold the team and the ballpark to Chicago's Tribune Company, paving the way for nighttime baseball at Wrigley Field. In 1984, when the Cubs won the National League East Division, pressure from Major League Baseball and the television networks brought the lights issue out of the dark. Despite neighborhood opposition to lights, a referendum cleared the city council, and in the summer of '88, light towers were erected. Then, on August 8th, history was made.
She won the tickets last night in a raffle.
Out of 50 million fans, when I was notified that I'm the guy who could turn on the lights, I got tongue-tied, I was amazed, and believe me, I was highly honored.
When they first turned on those lights out there, I had mixed emotion because I didn't want to see the lights go on and just kill Wrigley Field. But it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the night games, and a lot of people who came to that first baseball game enjoyed the night game.
We definitely made history last year playing the first night game, and you know, I think that it's going to be good. It just gives another time where a fan can come out and watch a ball game.
They added lights, which I think in itself is going to help the ball club, but I like the stadium just the way it is. It's not one of the more huge stadiums that you find in baseball. It's a ballpark. It's a place where you can come, relax, have fun. You don't have to dress up. You find people that sunbathe out in the right field, left field stands. They get involved in the game. It's what baseball is all about. You play it in the daytime and you just enjoy it and have fun.
Playing in the outfield, it kind of helped me relax. And I would talk to fans in the stand. I would kid with fans in the stand while the pitcher's taking time on the mound. So the closeness of the entire ballpark just gave me a feeling of homely feeling playing here in Wrigley Field.
A lot of people I've met brought their children, their grandchildren to the park, and they've grown up, and I've had an opportunity to see them, and it's really a blessing to have played there. And playing for the Cubs or playing for any park that has tradition, you get that continuous family tie, continuous love for you as a person and for the team in which you represented. And mine was the Cubs, and it's just very fulfilling.
If you try and explain to a fan what it means to see a ball game in Detroit, in Fenway Park, in Boston here, in Wrigley Field, Comiskey Park, you can't explain it. There's a special excitement because of all the fun.
Year after year, more than 1.5 million Cub fans make the faithful pilgrimage by elevated railway, by the L, to Wrigley Field, here on the north side of Chicago. They step off the Addison Street station and the ballpark's it's right there. It's only a block away. Ill-fated Federal League, an upstart competitor to the major leagues. That year, he hired architect Zachary Taylor Davis to build a new ballpark for his own Federal League entry, the Chicago Whales. The newly christened Weigman Field opened on April 23, 1914, and was one of the finest in the country, with a single-deck seating capacity of 14,000. The Chicago Whales played there only 2 years before the Renegade League folded. Weigman got the national... Wrigley Field is the oldest ballpark in the National League and the 4th oldest in the majors. But the Northside ballpark wasn't always called Wrigley Field and didn't always house the Cubs either. In 1914, Chicago restaurant chain owner Charles Weigman co-founded the interleague team, the Cubs, as part of a settlement and moved them into his own ballpark where they still play. The park became known as Cubs Park in 1920 after chewing gum magnate William Wrigley Jr. purchased the team from Weigman. In 1926, Wrigley added a new upper deck to enlarge the seating capacity and renamed the ballpark Wrigley Field. After the elder Wrigley died in 1932, his son Philip K. Wrigley assumed ownership.
Phil Wrigley was particularly visionary when he took over the ball club in the early 30s from his father. After that, the Cubs began to go real well. If you realize they had pennants in 29, 32, 35, 38, 45. And this was all during Phil Wrigley's time. He was a man who was gung-ho for let's go with radio, and later on, let's go with television.
The 1930